Professional Photographers of America. You know it as the organization that provides the best member benefits in the industry. The world's largest association dedicated to helping professional photographers reach their artistic and financial goals. But with more than 150 years of history, PPA is really so much more than that. In a very real sense, its history is the history of professional photography itself. The year is 1846. California is just becoming a territory of the United States. Pioneers are beginning their trek over the Rockies to settle the West. Dr. William Morton extracts a tooth using anesthetic for the very first time. He calls it ether. And America sees its first organized baseball game. The New York Nine beat the Knickerbockers 23-1. 1846 was also the year for a number of important births. George Westinghouse was born, the man who would eventually give us the alternating electrical current that still runs through our homes today. As was jeweler Peter Carl Fabergé, though he was years away from designing his first Fabergé egg. And perhaps less jeweled but more American, the man we know as Buffalo Bill, William Cody, was also born that same year. And then there was this man. Hardly a household name. It was in 1846 that 24-year-old Abraham Bogartis opened his first photographic studio at 363 Broadway in New York City, becoming one of the first daguerreotype studios in New York. Bogartis would not receive the widespread recognition that Westinghouse, Fabergé, or Cody were destined to. But his influence and effect on professional photography and PPA would be every bit as profound. Bogartis's and PPA's story really begins on the docks of New York City in September of 1839. Photography was barely in its infancy. Its beginnings dated back just 1 month prior, when in August of 1839, Louis Daguerre's daguerreotype and William Fox Talbot's calotype were patented within days of each other. It took just 1 month for the plans for the daguerreotype camera to secretly arrive in New York Harbor. Legend has it that Samuel Morse, the co-inventor of Morse code and the telegraph, paid to obtain those plans in a clandestine meeting on the docks of New York City. Who would be the first photographer on American soil? Morse immediately commissioned George Prosh, his telegraphic instrument maker, to build a daguerreotype camera. Remarkably, within days, the camera was ready. In fact, his first images were probably made in Prosh's workshop. Whether they were the first images made in America is still debated. What is certain is that daguerreotypes were being made in New York just 5 weeks after the process was patented in France. And the builder of the camera was George Prosh. A few months later, in 1840, Prosh advertised the first commercially available camera in America. Among those he convinced to join the world's newest trade was none other than the young Abraham Bogartis. Bogartis was among the industry's first and greatest visionaries, photographing, among others, New York's fashionable elite and U.S. presidents. But perhaps his greater work would not be behind the camera, for it was he who taught photographers how to organize. 1868. The smoke from the Civil War had not long since settled over Southern battlefields, as Americans, both Northern and Southern, struggled to put their lives back together. Ulysses Grant had just been elected president, and the world was starting to hear words like pasteurization and washing machine. It was in 1868 that advances in chemistry led to Alfred Nobel's invention of dynamite, and Alexander Parks introduced the world to a new material to be known as plastic. It was also the year Richard Gatling unveiled his Gatling machine gun, and Linus Yale gave us the Yale cylinder lock. And where would the world be without J. Osterhout's tin can opener? And it was that spring, April 7th to be exact, that Bogartis called for a meeting in New York of the industry's top influencers to mount the fight against a proposed highly controversial ambrotype patent. Among those attending were famed Civil War photographer Matthew Brady and Abraham Lincoln portraitist Alexander Hessler. While fighting the ambrotype patent was the first order of business, attendees soon found they shared a number of other concerns. They decided a second meeting was needed to flush out the most pressing issues. The group gathered again, this time in Philadelphia, on December 1st and 2nd, 1868, where they created a constitution and established objectives. The National Photographic Association was born. Dues were set at $2 for studio owners and $1 for employees, In fact, this is one of our very earliest membership certificates bearing the signature of the president, Abraham Bogartis. NPA's first convention was held 6 months later in Boston. The National Photographic Association grew slowly. It was during the convention of 1874 that one of Chicago's 2 great fires erupted near the convention hall. A moving account of the convention and the fire was given in the association's newsletter.
The session closed about 6 p.m., and as the members dispersed, for the first time they learned of the dreadful fire, which had been raging nearby for over 2 hours. The smoke was flying in dense clouds over the exposition building and caused great consternation all around. Great fear was entertained that the 6th exhibition of the National Photographic Association was doomed. Now, the wind would drive the flames over us in fearful sheets, and following, a rain of sparks and burning wood. At midnight, it was thought best to remove many of the goods. In the morning, we were delighted to find the building unharmed. The goods removed were replaced, and the exhibition halls looked as bright and beautiful as on the day before. But the fire had broken the spirit of enthusiasm, and there was a general anxiety to get away. Those who did not flee the city gathered together in the morning, and business was proceeded with as usual. But the backbone of the convention and exhibition was broken.
The National Photographic Association never fully recovered. The following year, the annual convention was overshadowed by the planning of the U.S. Centennial celebration. Association leaders placed emphasis on being seen as a national force and pushed a massive fundraising campaign to build a photographic hall at the Philadelphia Centennial Exposition, which they did. But the stress caused by the funding campaign for the hall was more than the young association could bear. By the time the Centennial celebration rolled around, NPA had run out of steam. Its members never met again. But the idea was still there, and in 1880 there was a movement to rebuild the association. The call went out for every photographer in the U.S. to meet in Chicago in August 1880. It was then that they reorganized, this time forming the Photographers Association of America, PAA. James Ryder of Cleveland was elected its first president, and PAA held its first convention, the predecessor of Imaging USA, in August of that same year. 237 people attended. 77 years later, the association, wanting to place a greater emphasis on professionalism, changed its name one last time, becoming Professional Photographers of America in 1957. From its beginnings, the association has always pushed itself to think bigger, to see farther. In 1890, PAA erected a Daguerre Memorial in Washington, D.C. That memorial, bearing the association's name, still sits in front of the National Portrait Gallery as part of the Smithsonian Institution today. For a time, the memorial was reflected in the association's logo. The association led the way in encouraging support for the war effort, working closely with the military to recruit and establish standards for photographers during 2 world wars. It ushered in the finest education in the world for professional photographers through its Winona School of Professional Photography, a legacy that continues today through PPA EDU, Professional Photographer Magazine, and Imaging USA. Recognizing the need to establish a standard of excellence for the industry, it established a merit and degree system in the midst of a Great Depression, awarding the first 6 Master of Photography degrees in 1939, and continues to be the standard bearer today. It led the way through almost countless social and technological changes and disruptions, glass plates to celluloid, black and white to color, film to digital, through depressions and world wars and social upheaval. In truth, there has been just one entity that has been there since the beginning, just one organization born out of a desire to fight for creators' rights that is still fighting for those rights today. PPA is in it for the long run. It doesn't change for trends or fads. It always strives to do what's right for the photography community. This means understanding who our members are and serving them as best as we can. We are PPA, for professional photographers by professional photographers, with unmatched benefits and resources, driven by a leadership that refuses to be satisfied Our board of directors, national council, and professional staff work to ensure our continued impact on the photographic industry. Our history is, well, it's the history of photography itself. We stand alone in our size, our scope, and our reach. There is no other organization like it. We continue to challenge ourselves every day. Advocacy, tradition, commitment, service, community. This is Professional Photographers of America. We are PPA.